You know, I don't really like to follow up things that are kind of opposite of what I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to make an attempt here because the subject matter I'm going to talk about is kind of more serious than what we experienced with the Father's Day celebration that we just had. And I think that sometimes it's hard to put the two together, and we think it's got to be either or. But I believe that part of what God wants for us is to be able to have a both and that neither one is necessarily meant to stand alone. So in that spirit, we're going to kind of look at a passage that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the world's eyes. And when we're going through something it describes really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. And because I believe it's not meant to make sense, but it's meant to be journeyed through. And so we're in a series called The Good Life, which is going through Matthew, and we're in the Sermon on the Mount. And I like this because life is not the same way as the good, right? It's kind of flipped. And the way to read life would be to kind of have to be over it and look down on it, and then it would make sense. And so there's a portion of life that we can't just have this focus on what is seen straightforward, but to really get life, we have to kind of take a little bird's eye view, or I want to put it this way. I believe life is meant to be found in reflection, because this is like a reflection, right? When you look down on something, if you look at it from a straightforward or a forward looking, it can look kind of off, but it's meant to be looked down upon, and then it makes sense. And it's meant to be reflected on. And that's what we're going to talk about today is, I think, one of the most reflective Beatitudes. It's also one that I don't get great joy about talking about this, except that it's also part of a very real experience for me in my walk with Jesus. And so the verse we're going to talk about is, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." And Katz has said that the word blessed is not really used the way that we understand it at the present, that there's other, maybe better synonyms for it. And so we're going to look at the passage in terms of that. But I want to focus in on, blessed are those who mourn. And it's in the present tense, who are mourning. It's not who have mourned or who have gotten over mourning, but it's blessed are those who mourn. It's a present state. And so I believe that mourning is connected up in a lot of ways to grief. And grief is not something that you overcome and never feel again. Grief is something that is kind of like a cold. That you can recover from a cold in a season, but that doesn't mean the cold doesn't come back. And in all likelihood, if you catch cold, you're going to get a cold again. Because having had a cold does not make you immune from ever getting a cold again. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about grief. And I want to talk about it in terms of grief with my father. My father died in 2019. And at that point in time, we had had a relationship that I would call a memorandum of understanding, right? That it was not where there was no conflict, but rather than take up arms, we weren't going to shoot at each other. It was not necessarily where we withheld things of support for one another, but it was very guarded and very controlled. So when my father died, I had to face this next question, which is, this is what grief is. How do I describe the grief of my father that I have for my father? And I came across this picture here that Kotz was so gracious to find out who this was, because I didn't know. And so if you look at that picture, there's a big hole in the middle. And to me, that's what my father dying represented, was a big hole. That what was once there was no longer there. That there wasn't anything there except this hole that I could only look through and not really see anything that made a whole lot of sense. Growing up, there were several images I had of my father. My father was an engineer, a mechanical engineer. And growing up as a elementary school kid, you have these things where, or we used to have these things where you told what your father did for a living, right? So whenever anyone would ask me, I would say, oh, my dad's an engineer. And immediately, usually, the response was, so what kind of train does he drive, right? Because what's an engineer? An engineer is someone who drives a train, right? So I asked my dad, so what does an engineer do? And my dad would say, well, we work a lot with paper and numbers, and we sit at a desk. And I said, and what do you do? And he said, we sit at a desk, work with paper and numbers. And to me, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, what kind of job is that? To just sit at a desk and do paper and numbers? It brought images to me of sitting in school, right? And the teacher would hand out a piece of paper, and we'd get out our pencils and said, do the worksheet, right? And I never knew why we did the worksheet. I never knew what we were supposed to learn from the worksheet. I just did the worksheet. And so my image of my dad was, well, he just did whatever he was told, right? That he didn't have anything. So I thought, well, that's when I got into junior high, I thought, well, I really would like to know what my dad does. And so when I was in junior high, they had an open house where the employees, my dad worked for TRW, well, it was TRW, and so they had an open house where they could bring their kids to show where they worked, right? So my dad asked, do you want to see where I work? I said, yeah, sure. And so I went, and so I asked my dad at that time, so what do you do? And he pointed to a desk, and he says, I sit at that desk, and I work on papers, and I do things with numbers. And I thought, okay, so what does all this So you're telling me that you're like in school for the rest of your life? And that's no life. Or I thought it was no life. I never knew what my dad really did because part of it was, I found out later, that the things he was working on, number one, he couldn't really explain. And number two, that he really didn't know what all this was how all this fit together with things. So the only time, there was another time when we had, it was some kind of celebration of the end of a project that my dad was part of. And so he invited the family. I don't know if any of my brothers went, but I did. And so I went, and at that ceremony, he got this little emblem, right? And it says, Ogo 1964. And so that was the project my dad worked on. OGO stands for Orbiting Geophysical Observation. So it was basically a weather satellite. And my dad's part on this was, can't see it too well, but there are these solar wings that part of solar panels that powered the batteries and things. So he designed those, and he was responsible for making sure those things worked. I didn't find all that out till after he died, because he never explained that to me. All I knew is he worked on OGO and what OGO stood for, and that was it. I never knew. So what happened was when he died, and I discovered all these things, I saw just how big that hole was. It wasn't just I couldn't see him anymore. It was I missed out on everything that you ever were, that I didn't really know you at all. And in that came this regret, but also the sense of mourning, that I never felt sorry for my dad or for what happened. Because I always felt like he was just the kind of person that where you had a problem, you don't succumb to the problem. You just power your way through the problem, and then it doesn't become a problem anymore. And so it was more a matter of, I don't need to be comforted. I just need to get some answers so I don't have this mourning anymore. What the Beatitude says is that you need to enter into this mourning to be able to receive comfort, because comfort is what you really need. And so my invitation through all of this was to start to see there was no way, like in this picture, that I'm ever going to fill in that hole, that it's going to exist. But what I see through that hole, I can determine. And I can choose. And that there are things that I can see through that hole that allow me to be able to navigate having the hole and not having the hole define me. The other thing I like about this is the man or the statue is bowed down. And, I think that one of the things that mourning does is it allows us to admit that we can't always stand strong, that we can't always be the one who says, this doesn't affect me, I'm not going to let it affect me. That we can be a person who says, this is hard, and I need help, and it hurts, and I need someone to comfort me. And the promise of God is that he wants to be that one. Along with, I believe he brings other people in there. But initially, the person that we can go to is him, who is able to meet us and understand us, and doesn't try to tell us, you don't need to feel that way. Because God knows that feeling is real, and it exists. And to deny that feeling is to deny the reality of what's going on inside of you. And what God wants to do is to cause that to be able to be healed in a way that nothing else can bring about. But does all that happen instantaneously? No. Does it all happen when it happens? Is it all complete? No. But it invites us into a process of being able to know that we are loved and we are treasured, and that it's easy to say, or easier maybe to say, that you love someone when everything's going good. But it's a lot tougher to say you love someone where everything is just trash. It's just junk. But what God says is, in the midst of that junk is me and you, and we're going to get through this. So I wanted to spend some time looking at this passage in terms of reflection. So I'm going to read it in various paraphrases and translations, and maybe there's a word that comes out to you, and I invite you to spend some time with that word. And then at the end of this, I'm going to invite you to a little exercise that can be helpful, hopefully, but the thing is, I love my dad. I can say that honestly. I don't have obviously, I can't tell him that physically, but I believe that he knows it too. And we can talk about this theological thing, but I believe that people feel up in heaven, that there's feelings up in heaven. And the feelings that we feel for our loved ones are transmitted to those who are in heaven or who have passed from this life. And so the love I feel for my dad, I think he knows. And there have been times when I feel like my dad understands that he loves me, and he would say, I love you. Even though it would be hard for him to say that, because he's not that kind of guy. That if he ever said that, I would probably say, who are you? Okay? But he does. Because in heaven, everything is pure. And everything is made to the point where things are seen as they truly and truly are. And so at the very depths of my dad was a love for me that he had no way to really express. He didn't know how to express in a lot of ways. He was just like us all. You know, to this day, one of the things that the enemy uses in my thinking is thinking, you're just like your dad. And to me, that's really hurtful. That's really painful. Because I don't want to be like my dad. I don't want to be like him. And to that, God says, but I love you. And I'm going to help you through it. And you aren't like your dad in a bad way. That I'm going to give you something better. But that doesn't take away the pain of that thought. doesn't take away that, but it allows there to be an opportunity for God to comfort. So why don't we look at these passages? The first one is from the New International Version. I just read it at the beginning. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I just want to emphasize will be. That it's not you feel mourning and you get comforted, but it's a process, will be. And as you journey through the mourning, the grief, that there is an end that will bring comfort. The next passage, our next version is the Common English Version. And it reads this way. Happy are people who grieve, because they will be made glad. And like God said, probably a better translation of blessed would be happy. And happy doesn't mean that you are exuberant in things. It can be a quiet kind of happiness, like where you see that even though your team lost, that you're still in the running, and you still believe you're going to win. I love the New York Knicks run. I thought the game where they came back from 29 points and things was amazing. But it was because they believed that there would be comfort at the end. That they would, and if they stuck together, they would experience that. I think that's a great lesson for us who mourn. Were they happy to be 29 points? But they would not use happy in that sense. But they were not overwhelmed by it. I think. So, next one here we have from the Message, which is a paraphrase by Eugene Peterson, and it says this. You're blessed when you feel you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. The amazing thing is that God is not drawn to people who are healthy. God is drawn to people who are in need. And the world says that the people to be celebrated are the people who have great achievements or wealthy and things. But God is saying, celebrate when you know that you don't have anything. That everything you thought most dear has been taken away. Because that's not a permanent state. It's a place where you can be filled with something that is greater than those things or that person. You can be connected to a person who loves you beyond what can be said, beyond words. A person who loves you dearly. So I would invite you to, I'm going to show this picture again. And I'm going to invite you to look at it. You can either think of this picture or maybe you got a picture in your head that how you would complete this of this is what grief is. And what would you put in that? Would it be some image of something desolate? Whatever you want to do, maybe you're good with words and things, that you can create a description of it. But I want to take a minute for you to invite a reflection on what is grief in your life right now? How would you complete that? And then I'm going to close in prayer, and then we're going to just be able to come together and worship God in song. Okay? So I'm going to give you a minute to reflect on this is what grief is.